He would go to the swimming pool. I'd go set the pool up for him so he could lay out by the pool.
Few moments before she passed away, the maid who worked at Graceland for years shared a secret she had kept for a long time. Nancy Rooks had stayed quiet to protect Elvis, but in her final days, she said something that shocked everyone. At this point, she was finally ready to tell everything. Join us as we expose the dark truth she kept for years. The secrets Nancy kept. For many years after Elvis Presley passed away, Nancy Rooks stayed silent. It wasn't because she didn't have thoughts or feelings to share. She did. But in Memphis, there were certain lines you just didn't cross, especially when your life had been closely tied to someone as iconic as Elvis. Nancy had witnessed fans from all over the world travel great distances just to stand outside Graceland. She had watched grown men and women break down in tears, talking about Elvis like he was part of their own family. She felt that sorrow too, and she truly understood it. And maybe that's the reason she chose to stay quiet. Not because she didn't remember, but because she respected the weight of it all. Even though she kept her mouth shut, her silence still carried meaning. After Elvis was gone, Nancy stayed with the Presley family. She didn't just walk away. Instead, she helped Graceland become what it is today, a place millions visit to feel close to Elvis again. Even though tourists visited Graceland every day and camera flashes lit up its famous rooms, there was one area no one could enter: Elvis's private upstairs space. It was strictly off-limits. Not even most of the staff were allowed in. Only a few trusted people, like Nancy Rooks, ever stepped inside, and it was only when it was truly necessary. Nancy once explained that the bedroom and bathroom were only cleaned maybe once or twice a month. It wasn't because they didn't care. It was a quiet agreement among them all. Still, every time Nancy stepped into those rooms, something inside her changed. She would walk across that same hallway, that same bathroom floor, and instantly remember how it all ended. The memories didn't leave. They came back with every sheet she folded, every counter she wiped. She hardly ever talked about that day in public, not in full detail. Even in the book she eventually released in the 1990s, Inside Graceland, she kept things soft and kind. The pages were filled with stories about Elvis's love for peanut butter sandwiches, his odd sleeping habits, and how sweet he could be. But when it came to the chapter everyone was hoping for, the chapter about the morning he passed away, her words became vague. She didn't dive deep. She kept that part hazy, almost as if she was afraid to relive it out loud. For the world, that was enough. But those closest to Nancy knew there was more beneath the surface. In certain conversations, when specific subjects came up, she would pause. Her gaze would drift off, as if she was somewhere else completely. One time, she supposedly told someone that if people ever discovered what she knew, they might never be able to listen to Elvis's music the same way again. That wasn't a warning. It was more like a quiet wait. As time passed, more questions started to rise. Why was the timeline of Elvis's final hours so blurry? Why were there stories that multiple pill bottles had been removed from the scene before anyone from law enforcement got there? Why did it take so long for the toxicology report to be finalized? And why did people who were actually there, people like Nancy, never explain those gaps? The truth behind the bathroom door. The truth is, Nancy tried in her own way. Softly, without causing noise or drama. Some of Nancy Rooks' closest companions said she had quietly shared pieces of the truth with them over the years, but she always made them promise to never speak about it. She told them there were certain things inside that bathroom that simply didn't belong there. Ginger Alden, Elvis's fiancée at the time, was too heartbroken to explain, and things the group of loyal men around Elvis, often called the Memphis Mafia, didn't want the police investigating. One story, never confirmed directly by Nancy, claimed she had been asked to clean up the area before the paramedics even arrived. Though she never spoke about it openly, time slowly chipped away at her silence. Not out of anger, but because the weight of what she knew grew heavier with the years. She wasn't someone filled with resentment, But as she aged and began facing her own health struggles, something inside her changed. In an interview just a year before she passed away, she quietly said that she had done what was asked of her by the Presley family. But deep down, she believed the full truth needed to come out before her time ended. It didn't sound like a threat, more like a soft sigh of release. Most people assumed that her book had revealed everything. But what if the real story, the one that truly mattered, was the one she never included in those pages? What if Nancy saw something that day she could never forget, but didn't know how to share? What if her silence wasn't just loyalty, but a quiet kind of guilt? As the decades passed after Elvis's death, her final words to those around her began to take on a different meaning. They weren't just sweet memories of a music icon, they carried a weight, an urgency. She had spent nearly her whole life protecting his memory, showing the world the best parts of him. But toward the end of her own life, it seemed she was questioning whether staying quiet had really been the right thing. It was like a final confession she needed to make. Just before she passed, Nancy made a small but shocking statement. Not in front of cameras, not in a public speech. That wasn't her style. But the people who had known her best said something shifted in those last months. She became more thoughtful, more honest, and then one day she said something no one ever expected from the woman who had guarded Elvis's truth for over 40 years. She said it was finally time to say everything. At first, no one was sure what she meant, but little by little it became clear that she was ready to let go of what she had been carrying. Not to stir up drama or seek attention, she simply wanted peace. Nancy had always spoken kindly of Elvis. She shared heartwarming stories about his habits, his favorite meals, his strange sleeping schedule, those tiny moments that made fans feel like they knew him. But there were deeper things, more serious ones, that she had locked away. A close friend later revealed that Nancy had confided something troubling. Elvis, she said, hadn't just been tired in the days before he passed. He had been deeply unwell, much worse than what anyone outside really understood. She said he looked like he had reached a point where he couldn't take it anymore. He was drained, worn out from the constant medications, tired of pretending that everything was fine. Nancy reportedly went even further. She claimed that some of the pills Elvis was taking hadn't been prescribed for him at all. Some were apparently passed around casually by those around him with no proper control. That summer, she noticed new medicine bottles tossed in the trash nearly every day. She even mentioned that Elvis had begun falling asleep in the middle of conversations while eating, even while speaking mid-sentence. At the time, she had thought he was just exhausted, but looking back now, she feared it had been something far more serious. Nancy finally spoke about something she had kept hidden for many years. It was what really happened right after Elvis was found lying on the bathroom floor. When Ginger Alden, crying and panicked, yelled from upstairs that something terrible had happened, Nancy didn't hesitate. She rushed to the room as quickly as she could. When she got there, she saw Elvis face down and not moving. For a moment, she just stood there, shocked. But her instincts took over. She ran downstairs to let the others, the Memphis Mafia, know what was going on. Before the ambulance made it to the house, someone, Nancy never revealed who, quietly told her to tidy up the space a little. Back then, she didn't question it. She just wiped the counter, fixed a towel, and straightened a few things here and there. It didn't seem like a big deal at the time. But when reporters started asking tough questions, and people began wondering about the pills and the exact timing of events, Nancy started to understand that maybe what she did wasn't as harmless as she first thought. She reportedly told someone that she didn't even know what she might have been covering up. She was only following directions. There were moments from that day that stayed with her, like the sound she heard that morning, the thud that didn't feel right, like how fast Elvis drank his water, or how quickly she tried to make the room look clean. For years, she tried to convince herself those little things didn't matter. But as the end of her own life neared, her thoughts changed. And then she said something she had never written in her book, something that changed the way people saw everything. Elvis didn't just pass away suddenly. According to her, It was more like he was slowly slipping away, and nobody around him stepped in to stop it. That single sentence changed everything. The people closest to Nancy said she looked like she was carrying a heavy load in her final days, not because of what she did, but because of what she didn't say. She began to wonder if staying quiet for all those years helped protect Elvis, or if it helped shield the people who had failed him. Her final words seemed to say that it was time for everything to come out. No more secrets. Before she passed, the woman who once walked the quiet halls of Graceland, dusting and folding and keeping stories to herself, finally shared the truth. And it wasn't what fans expected. Not because Elvis was a bad man, he wasn't, but because some of the people around him might not have done their part to keep him safe. There were warning signs, and Nancy, in her quiet and humble way, had seen so many of them, but she spent a lifetime pretending she hadn't. When people found out that Nancy Rooks had left behind more than just kind memories and old recipes, the reaction didn't explode right away. It spread slowly, just like Nancy had always moved, quiet and unnoticed. But as her words started to sink in, they hit hard. Some fans just couldn't accept it. To them, Nancy's old book was the final word, just simple, loyal, and full of love. But now, that same gentle housekeeper was being quoted as saying Elvis didn't just fall and pass away, he slowly faded, and that she might have unknowingly played a part in cleaning up the area before the truth could be fully seen. The idea that someone close to Elvis might have tampered with the scene, even by accident, reopened old pain. The official cause of death had always been questioned. Yes, a heart attack, but the mix of medications in his system, the delay before calling for help, and the missing pieces from his toxicology report all returned to public discussion with fresh energy. People online were suddenly talking again. Fans and writers who had studied Elvis for years rushed to revisit the details. Had Nancy really been told to clean? What exactly did she see that morning? Why hadn't she spoken up sooner? And who, if anyone, had asked her to stay silent? Let's find out. Why she kept silent for a long time. Some people, though, saw her confession as a brave step. They believed that in her final days, Nancy chose honesty over fear, that maybe she realized telling the truth didn't mean disrespecting Elvis. In fact, it might mean finally showing him the respect he always deserved. They believed fans had the right to know that even someone as legendary as Elvis was human, that even kings can fall apart, sometimes slowly, sometimes silently, and sometimes because the people around them didn't act when they should have. The Presley family didn't say anything about it. Graceland kept running as usual. Tours continued, music played, souvenirs sold. But among those still working quietly behind the scenes, people who had known Nancy, who had seen her work and care for that home, there was a sense that something had changed, that a line had been crossed, not out of anger or betrayal, but out of deep love for the man they had all once served and called family. Nancy Rooks never chased attention. There were no cameras, no press conferences, and no juicy book deals for her. All she left behind were a few soft-spoken words, shared quietly with people she trusted. But somehow, those words carried more weight than any headline ever could. She didn't need to accuse anyone or say names out loud. She just told what she knew, what she had held inside for so long. And that small truth, spoken so gently, changed the way people looked at Elvis's life, and more importantly, his death. People had always seen Elvis's passing as a sad moment, a sudden tragedy. But after hearing Nancy's quiet story, it started to feel more like a slow fall that happened right in front of everyone's eyes. Yet no one stepped in to stop it. Nancy had spent most of her life blending into the background, walking the halls of Graceland unnoticed. But after she was gone, her voice finally echoed louder than ever. She hadn't left behind drama. She left behind something heavier, like questions. Questions that sat quietly in people's minds, making them wonder what really happened. She never meant to harm Elvis's name. If anything, she wanted people to remember the sweet, kind man she once served. The man who hummed gospel songs in the kitchen. The man who liked his bacon extra crispy. She didn't come forward to break anyone's heart. She just couldn't carry the silence anymore, because even the softest truths eventually rise up through the cracks of stories built to protect someone. Nancy didn't act like she knew everything. She wasn't a reporter. She wasn't a nurse or expert. She was just a housekeeper, someone who cooked meals and made beds and happened to see things others didn't. But that's exactly why her story meant so much. She didn't exaggerate. She didn't make things up. Her words mattered because she was really there. She lived that life. She cleaned those rooms. She heard those sounds. And when she finally said it was time to speak, she didn't do it to blame anyone. She did it because holding things inside started to feel wrong. For years, she believed staying quiet was her way of showing love. But as she got older, she started to see that pretending everything was okay might not have been the right kind of love after all. What Nancy left behind was a more complicated picture, not just of Elvis, but of the world around him. A world where pills were given out too easily, where routines weren't questioned, where people stayed silent even when they knew something didn't feel right. Fans who had once thought they knew the full story were now faced with a new part they never saw coming. Not because Nancy exposed something shocking, but because she showed what it's like to carry the weight of what you didn't say or couldn't stop. She wasn't trying to rewrite Elvis's history. She was simply showing that even legends are still human, and the people who help them, the maids, the cooks, the friends, are human too. Sometimes grief turns into silence, and sometimes silence lasts a lifetime. Nancy's truth wasn't about calling anyone out. It was about finally letting go of a story she had held by herself for far too long. Nancy is no longer here. The woman who tucked away his clothes, who handed him water the morning he passed away, who led the medics to him when he needed help, that woman can't explain her story anymore. But her voice still lives on, in the little things she said before the end, in the bits of truth she finally allowed herself to share. And maybe, just maybe, that was the bravest thing she ever did. Well, to fully understand what this revelation means to every single person, and Nancy herself, it is necessary to rewind to how Nancy met Elvis and how they lived as the boss and the help. Stay tuned. Life before his death. Before the rest of the world came to know Elvis Presley as a music icon, Nancy Rooks knew him in a much more ordinary way. She didn't meet him on a stage or at a concert, but rather in the most unexpected and simple place, the kitchen. She recalled seeing him walk in, wearing his house slippers, still sleepy, asking if there was any bacon left to eat. Nancy was hired to work at his home, Graceland, to handle cooking and cleaning, but her job quickly turned into something deeper. She became part of his everyday life, someone he trusted to be around even in his most private moments. Over the years, Nancy became more than just staff. She became a constant in the unpredictable rhythm of Elvis's home. She saw everything, from cheerful breakfasts to the moments when emotions ran high and Elvis didn't hide his feelings. Graceland wasn't just a fancy house, it was full of shifting moods. Sometimes Elvis would wander through the halls in the middle of the night, completely quiet, lost in his own thoughts. On other days, the air would be filled with music, and Nancy would find herself humming and laughing along with him in the kitchen. Elvis had a deep love for gospel songs. One of his favorites was "How Great Thou Art," and he would sing it at full volume without worrying about who was listening. Nancy often joined in while cooking, her hands busy with a frying pan and a towel over her shoulder. To her, he wasn't a superstar. He was simply Mr. Elvis. He always used kind words, never forgetting his manners. That's something she always remembered about him. She would tell people that he was raised the right way. No matter how loud the phones got or how many people came in and out of the house, he always treated her kindly. But her time at Graceland wasn't always easy. Working there meant keeping up with Elvis's unusual routine, which often stretched late into the night. If he got hungry at 3 a.m. and wanted something like bacon, fresh biscuits, or a slice of sweet potato pie, Nancy was ready in her apron, smiling and prepared to cook. Her duties went far beyond sweeping and mopping. Sometimes she had to help Elvis with his clothes while he was still wearing them. She would lay out what he needed to wear, organize his things, get the pool area ready for him, and adjust to a lifestyle where morning and night often felt the same. Elvis didn't live a regular life, and Nancy adjusted to it with quiet strength. She saw more than anyone ever imagined. And long after her days at Graceland ended, she wrote a book sharing her memories. She called it Inside Graceland, a glimpse into the private side of a man the world thought they knew. Nancy Rooks, the woman who once cared for Elvis Presley's home, held on to a heart full of warm and tender memories. Her stories were always kind, often funny, and filled with gentle moments from behind the scenes. She never gossiped or spoke with bitterness, but even in her honesty, she kept some parts of her experience locked away. In quiet interviews, she admitted that there were certain memories she didn't share, not because she was scared, but because of her deep loyalty to him. Still, whenever she did speak, fans listened closely. They wanted to know everything about how Elvis really lived, what meals he enjoyed, how he acted when no one was watching, what kind of clothes he wore when the spotlight was off. Nancy gave just enough to satisfy people's curiosity, but she always protected the real man behind the fame. She spoke about how Elvis liked everything clean, especially how he would take multiple showers in one day. She remembered how he wanted his bacon crispy and his scrambled eggs cooked a certain way. She talked about the way his eyes always seemed to be searching, even when he was worn out, like he was looking for something he could never quite explain. But the most meaningful thing Nancy gave wasn't small facts or stories. It was a different way of seeing him. Through her words, Elvis stopped being just a legend or a sad story. He became a real person again, a man who had real emotions, who sometimes ate too much, who sometimes didn't want to speak to anyone, who laughed hard and cried quietly. He didn't let many people close, but Nancy was one of the few who stayed near, trusted, and steady. She never tried to shine in his spotlight. She stayed in the background, loyal and silent. But as her own life neared its end, something changed. She began to mention that there were still pieces of the story that the world hadn't heard yet. She suggested that some truths had remained hidden for a long time, and maybe it was finally the right moment to let them out. When she quietly said it was time to reveal everything, those who knew her began to wonder. What really happened that tragic night? The morning of August 16, 1977, felt like any regular day. Or at least it began that way. Elvis had stayed up late, which wasn't unusual. He had spent the early hours with his fiancée, Ginger Alden, and his cousin Billy Smith playing racquetball. When he came back inside Graceland, Nancy was already in the kitchen starting her day. She remembered seeing him walk up the steps, clearly tired, but still as polite as ever. She asked if he wanted breakfast, just like she always did. He told her no, that he wasn't hungry, but he would like some water before heading to bed. It didn't seem like anything special. The night had been warm, and he had just been active, so asking for water wasn't surprising. Nancy then asked Pauline, another maid, to take him a jug of cold water. It was the kind they used to keep orange juice in, with a handle for easy pouring. That small moment, like so many others in Graceland, passed quietly. It didn't feel important at the time, just one more peaceful exchange in a house full of memories. Even Pauline noticed that something felt off that morning. When Elvis took the jug of water, he didn't just sip it, he drank it quickly, almost desperately, like someone who hadn't had water in days. Later, she admitted she had never seen him gulp down water that way before. Nancy, though, didn't think too much of it at the time. She guessed he was just worn out from playing racquetball and brushed the whole thing aside. Still, that odd moment lingered quietly in the back of her mind. Just before the clock hit 10 a.m., Nancy heard a noise from upstairs. It wasn't loud or crashing, but it didn't sound normal either. It was a strange thud like something soft, but enough to make her stop. She froze for a second, listening, waiting, but nothing else followed. No shouts, no footsteps, not even a voice, only silence. The kind of silence that tricks you into thinking everything's fine. So she shook it off and kept on with her routine. Hours passed. Then, sometime around 2 p.m., the house intercom buzzed. It was Ginger, Elvis's fiancée, and her voice came through barely understandable, trembling with fear. She was asking if anyone was downstairs, and that something terrible had happened. The sound of her crying followed. That's when Nancy's stomach dropped. She didn't need to hear anything more to know this wasn't just someone tripping or breaking a glass. Something serious had happened. Without a second thought, Nancy dropped what she was doing and ran upstairs. Her heart felt heavy in her chest as she moved quickly through the hall, turning into the dressing area. And that's where she saw him, Elvis, lying face down on the bathroom floor, not moving. Her breath caught. She didn't scream. She didn't panic. She turned right around and rushed back down to find the Memphis Mafia, Elvis's inner circle. This was no time for hesitation. Everyone who needed to be there had to be told. At first, there was confusion. Then slowly, fear began to take over the house. The ambulance was called. People started panicking, but Nancy kept her head. When the medics got there, they didn't even know how to move around inside Graceland. It was Nancy who showed them how to carry the stretcher up the tight staircase, over their heads, and through the narrow turns of the hallway. She led them through every twist and corner. Eventually, they brought Elvis down. Nancy got one final glimpse of him. She later said he looked like he was only sleeping, but the truth was, he had already left them. His face had turned slightly blue. After that, everything happened in a blur. Sirens screamed, cameras appeared, and crowds gathered as well. The whole world mourned Elvis Presley. But to Nancy, it wasn't the global superstar she lost, it was Mr. Elvis, the same man who once stood joking with her while she fixed the hem of his pants. Nancy didn't step into the spotlight when the news exploded. She stayed in the shadows, letting others speak. The official cause was said to be heart failure. Nothing more, nothing less. But not everyone believed that. Quiet rumors went about medicine bottles, about timing, about what might have really gone on in those last hours. From the moment Elvis drank that cold water to when Nancy found him lying lifeless. Nancy didn't speak about any of that back then. She held on to her thoughts, letting the officials do what they needed to do. But years later, she returned to that morning in her mind. And this time, she wasn't afraid to say more. She spoke not just about what she saw, but what she thought might have happened. The doubts she carried, the things she wished she had noticed sooner, and just maybe, things she unknowingly kept hidden all along. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your screen.